Call this meeting to order. This is the 119th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Orders of the day pursuant to Standing Order 81-4, dealing with main estimates 2013-14. Votes 1, 5, 10, L15, 25, 30, 35, 40, and 45 under Finance referred to the committee on Monday, February 25th, 2013. Colleagues, we have officials here from the Department of Finance. We want to welcome you back to the committee to discuss main estimates. And Ms. Harrison, we have Sherry Harrison, Assistant Deputy Minister, Corporate Services Branch. My understanding, Ms. Harrison, is you'll be doing the opening statement for the officials. So if you can present the opening statement and if you can introduce your colleagues at the table, and then we'll have questions from the members for the officials.
Thank you. Je m'appelle Sherry Harrison et je suis...
My name is Sherry Harrison and I am the Assistant Deputy Minister responsible for corporate services at the Department of Finance. With me today are officials to assist in responding to your questions on the 2013-14 main estimates for the Department of Finance. The main estimates for 2013-14 total $87.6 billion. Over 99% of total departmental requirements, or $87.5 billion, relates to statutory items that have already been approved by Parliament through enabling legislation. The statutory items are displayed in the estimates document for information purposes and will not be included in the appropriation bill.
There is a net increase of $2.4 billion over the 2012-13 main estimates, with the major contributing factors being a $2.7 billion increase in transfer payments to the provinces and territories resulting from the legislative funding formulae, a $1.5 billion increase as a result of transitional assistance payments provided for under the Comprehensive Integrated Tax Coordination Agreements with Quebec and Prince Edward Island, a $1.3 billion decrease in interest on unmatured debt as a result of the interest estimate being revised to reflect the decrease in the average forecast of interest rates, a $0.4 billion decrease in other interest costs as a result of the interest estimate being revised to reflect the decrease in the average long-term bond rate, a $10 million increase for a payment to the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development for the development and implementation of pilot projects to demonstrate the role of innovative market incentives in agricultural applied research, and a $6.5 million increase for the purchase of domestic coinage, which reflects the savings identified as part of the spending review, offset by net redemption and administration costs due to an accelerated profile of penny redemption rates, as well as increased cost estimates for demand and metal prices increases reflective of recent growth projections for overall coinage. The voted grants and contributions include a decrease of $210 million resulting from the cessation of payments to Export Development Canada for debt relief by the Paris Club. The operating vote reflects a net increase of $9.4 million over the previous main estimates. The increases are mainly due to $10 million for the department's relocation to 90 Elgin Street in 2014-15, $6.8 million for government advertising programs, and $1.2 million for collective bargaining. The increases were offset by decreases of $4.2 million related to savings identified as part of the Budget 2012 spending review and $4.4 million for various sunsetting funding related to personal income tax initiatives, corporate finance and asset management, G20 Framework Working Group, GST technical issues, and maintaining the strength of Canada's financial system. Nous nous ferons un plaisir de répondre aux questions des membres du comité concernant.
We would be pleased to address questions that the committee may have on these main estimates. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll start with the members' questions. Ms. Nash, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My first questions are generally on operating expenditures. The The main estimates state that operating expenditures will be increasing by $9.4 million overall. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, looking at some of the details, budget 2012 meant a $4.2 million cut, but I noticed that advertising is up by $6.8 million. Is that $6.8 million figure correct?
From main estimates to main estimates, that is correct. Last year it was $3.2 million, and this year it's $10 million in the main estimates.
Okay, so $6.8 million increase. Can you tell us more about that? Why does the Department of Finance feel the need to advertise itself in that way, that we would see a $6.8 million increase in advertising?
Mr. Chair, could I have my colleague, Mr. Katta, come up to talk about the specifics of the advertising item, please?
Mr. Katta, please.
The $6.8 million is for Economic Action Plan advertising, which is essentially to inform Canadians about the measures that are contained in the Economic Action Plan, and also that they not just are being informed, but that they can also avail themselves of the benefits of these various measures. At this point in time, in terms of how the $10 million per se will be spent this year, decisions haven't yet been taken. This will be determined over the coming weeks and months. But the general purpose is Economic Action Plan advertising.
Now, the estimates specify the following objective, that, and I'm quoting, government spending is focused on results and delivers value for taxpayer dollars. So do you feel that the so-called Economic Action Plan advertising are delivering that value for taxpayer dollars?
Well, I think there's a couple of dimension to this. First is, as you well know, the Economic Action Plan is at the heart of the government priorities. So it is a sort of a major instrument to generate economic growth, jobs, and so forth. So it is a key piece and a key priority of the government's agenda. So from that perspective, it is legitimate that the government would want to communicate and would want to let Canadians know about these priorities. The second aspect is through our own research that we've done, public opinion research, focus groups, surveys as well. Canadians have indicated that they want the government to inform them about the government's priorities and programs. So these two objectives, if you like, meet in some way, if I can say so, through advertising. I mean, advertising is part of a communications toolkit that is available to communicate with Canadians about the government priorities.
Really? I mean, it's interesting. I've had a lot of feedback from Canadians who say there's nothing specific in those ads that tell them about specific programs or services that are a benefit to them, but they see it as government promotional advertising. The ads talk about good government, and that's certainly in the eye of the beholder. And I have to say there's been tremendous backlash, and I'm speaking primarily locally in my community, from folks who have said that they feel the government's engaging in propaganda on their tax dime. Has there been any consideration of that, given that surveys have shown very diminished returns for the effectiveness of this advertising?
Okay, just a brief response, please.
No. Our own research shows, and in fact, after each sort of advertising campaign, we are required to evaluate the results and the effectiveness. And what's interesting, over the last 2-3 years, the awareness of the Economic Action Plan has risen. So from about 40% or 45% 2-3 years ago to close to 65%. That's what our results show, which is quite significant. So from that perspective, it shows that to some extent,
Okay.
it resonates with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. We'll go to Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the officials again. I have to say I have the exact opposite happening in my riding, and places I go, people are thanking us for making them aware of what the government has done so that when they file their taxes, they can actually take advantage of things like the children's fitness credit, things like the hiring credit for small business, etc. So without the advertising, many of them say, they wouldn't know about it. The hiring credit just comes right off. So, I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful tool to be able to advertise and teach people what it is that they're going to be saving as a result of the measures taken by this government. Talking about savings, I note that in Budget 2012, our government had outlined it would be looking at some areas of savings. And so I believe that there are some savings reflected in the main estimates from that. So if you could just tell us about the identified savings as a result of Budget 2012.
In response to that, maybe I'll focus in on the voted operating reductions. The department has a reduction of $4.4 million reflected in the estimates with respect to operating savings. There are 3 areas within the operating vote that we have focused on. In the internal services, we are streamlining our internal services. We've taken a number of measures to consolidate some of the functions, realign some of the activities. We're also, on the policy and research side, consolidating some of our research and analysis function on the policy side to generate savings. And we're also have some small savings in our operating costs related to better use of information technology, for example, in our recruitment programs, greater use of Skype and online applications and such.
Excellent. Thank you. I do want to talk about the transfer payments to provinces. I note that in the main estimates, there's a $2.7 billion increase in transfer payments to the provinces and territories. And I think this is as a result of the legislated funding formula. So I'm wondering if you can explain to the committee how the funding formula has changed and how this change will affect the provinces.
Thank you. There aren't actually any changes this year with respect to the funding formula for major transfers to the provinces. There are some legislated growth rates with respect to the major transfers. First of all, equalization, the equalization program, the total entitlement grows by a 3-year moving average of the gross domestic product. The Canada Health Transfer grows at 6%, the CHT grows at 3%, and territorial formula financing, which provides similar benefits to the territories as equalization, recognizing their special circumstances, grows with respect to a legislated gap-filling formula between the a proxy for the expenditures that the government needs to provide services and a proxy for its revenues. So those growth rates in those 4 major transfers are the lion's share of the growth in that transfer.
Very good. But great to hear about the increases in transfers. How will that help our provinces and territories?
Well, I mean, there is these transfer programs provide significant funding to provinces and territories. With respect to equalization, it's an unconditional grant whose objective is to enable provinces to provide relatively comparable services at relatively comparable levels of taxation. The CHT is funding for health care for provinces. The CST is for social programs with a focus on education, child care, and services such as those. And TFF, again, is a lot like equalization, but in the territorial context. So it also is you know, the line, it is actually the vast majority of government revenues for the 3 Northern Territories.
And I note that my 45 seconds, my province of Manitoba is one of the only provinces that still gets the total transfer protection. And I must note I've been flooded in my office because as we continue to increase funding for the provinces, we have a NDP government in the province of Manitoba who just raised the provincial sales tax. So lots of disappointment out there with regards to the NDP government in my province.
On that from the officials. Go to Mr. Bryson, please, for your round.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kata, you were speaking of the public opinion research that the Department of Finance commissions to gauge the effectiveness of your advertising. You commissioned Ipsos Reid to conduct a survey on the effectiveness of the Jobs and Growth campaign using the Government of Canada's advertising campaign evaluation tool. And the results were that more than 2/3 of Canadians did not see any economic action plan during the survey's time frame. And of those who could remember the ads, 92% said they did nothing as a result of the ad. Now, so how can you say they're effective when 92% of the people who actually remember the ads said they did nothing as a result of the ads?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, as I said previously, there is 2 dimensions to the research that we do. There is the level of awareness of the Economic Action Plan. And then in terms of the actual action, you're right to point out that the numbers are not necessarily high, but at the same time, I mean, you will avail yourself of a benefit or seek more information on the basis that, you know, you are seeking that information. So the fact that you're made aware of the Economic Action Plan, I mean, that's one part, and knowing that the government has a plan. And then the second aspect, which would make sense that there would be less people that would then take action to avail themselves to seek, they could also seek information through other means than, for example, visiting the Economic Action Plan website. So our research is one measure of the effectiveness of our campaign.
Yeah, well, but you said your research validated the effectiveness of the ads, and I'm saying the research you commissioned did not validate. In fact, there is quite damning the effectiveness of the campaign. I mean, the more than 2/3 didn't recall it, and those who did recall it, 92% said it did not affect their behavior. They didn't. It did not impact their decisions.
Yeah, but again, I go back to what I pointed earlier that you know, again, our research has shown that Canadians do want the government to communicate about its priorities. So, and that's what the Department of Finance is doing. The Economic Action Plan is an extremely important piece of the...
Do you have the part of the survey where Canadians are saying, I mean, do you ask them questions, for instance, do you want the government to communicate or advertise its priorities? Yeah. And do you attach a price tag to that? Do you say, is it worth $100 million? Is it of tax revenue? Do you provide them with the opportunity to weigh it against the actual cost to the Treasury?
Actually, the research that we do is accessible through the National Archives site, because within 6 months of the research that we do, it has to be posted and made public. So you can see over the, for example, 4 or 5 years, you can see you can track the evolution, and it includes the data, information, the questionnaire. Now, to your question, it is more of a generic question in the sense of and I don't have the exact wording with me, but it's more of a generic question as to do you believe that it is important for the government to communicate?
Sure. Have you ever considered the idea of asking questions, for instance, which would be a priority for you in terms of government investment? Government advertising to promote its message, or investments in food safety? Just curiously, have you considered bringing Canadians into the tent a little bit and giving them an opportunity to opine more granularly?
We haven't asked that question specifically. Again, our research either focuses on specifically the advertising campaign itself. So there's a bit of a set formula to those kinds of evaluation. And then the other research is for example, pre-budget research that we do in terms of gauging people's sense of priorities for the upcoming budget. So they're pretty big picture type of questions.
1 minute, Mr. Bryson.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to ask a question on OSFI's funding. OSFI's requested funding in the 2013-2014 main estimates is the same as that requested in 2012-13. At the same time, the RPP indicates that there will be a need for new resources, or ought to be, due to staffing or technology demands, or to changes to the Basel capital framework. How do you expect OSFI to meet these increased challenges and responsibilities without any increase to its resources?
I believe we have somebody from OSFI here who can speak to their main estimates.
Okay,
Welcome.
sorry.
Yeah. Just a brief response, if we could, please.
Pardon me?
Just a brief response, if we could.
Yes, so OSFI is mainly funded through assessments that we get from the financial institutions and the private pension plans that we regulate. So the fact that the amount in the main estimates is flat is the Office of the Chief Actuary is actually using that appropriation. And so the increase that you see in the other parts of the main estimates is funded through our base assessment in the financial institutions and the private pension plans that we regulate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the officials for being here today. I do want to begin just by saying that we on this side believe in transparency and accountability. So we are in favor, of course, of informing the Canadian people of the government services that we offer so they can take advantage of them, unlike the members on the other side who clearly do not believe in such a concept. But I would like to also to mention that in terms of provincial spending on government advertising, it's the governments of Ontario and Manitoba that lead on the provincial side. One, of course, Manitoba, the NDP, and Ontario, the Liberal. So I think that's just worth mentioning. I would like to ask, I've noticed that the main estimates are presented in a little different way this year. Could you explain the difference and why they are different from last year, from previous years?
I guess I would summarize the major, there's some changes in format. The organizations, for example, are listed alphabetically rather than by portfolio, just for ease of trying to find an organization. But within this, there's a little bit more graphical information. For us, for all departments, the statutory items, which as I indicated in my opening remarks, have been previously approved by Parliament through the enabling legislations, are summarized in the text. And there's more information given on the voted appropriations, which for the Department of Finance are our operating costs and our grants and contribution costs. And you've got more information of that. You've got the 11-12 actual expenditures. You've got last year's main estimates, plus what was approved in the supplementary estimates, which is new this year. So you can see last year's full picture of the estimates here compared to where we are this year in the main estimates. So a little bit more information on the voted. The statutory information is still there, but most of it is online on the Treasury Board site.
Okay. So once again, that would help with in terms of transparency and just being more open to the Canadian people.
There's certainly, I would say, much more estimates and expenditure data in these estimates than prior years.
Yeah, thank you. There's I also see that there's a decrease in interest costs in a few of the items, and such as unmatured debt. Could you comment a bit on that and explain?
Perhaps my colleague.
Yes, the interest costs on unmatured debt, they're basically lower because as we do an average of the private sector forecast, their interest rate forecast has been lower compared to what was in the last estimates.
Okay. And what would you say is attributed? What has caused these lower rates?
These are, I can't speak for the private sector economists myself, but their expectations for interest rates going forward are generally lower, both in the short term and then for the long term rates.
Okay, and these are an aggregate, right?
We take an average.
Yeah, and when you say, so you take these from the private sector economists?
Yes. So the Department of Finance surveys for the budget and for the fall update. A number of private sector forecasts for their expectations on interest rates, gross domestic product growth, etc. We take an average of those results and use that as our baseline forecast for public debt charges, which will then in turn affect the statutory estimate here.
Oh, I see. Okay. Now, just sort of switching gears a bit. Excuse me. Sorry? 1 minute. Okay. The penny, I see, went out of well, we all know the penny went out of circulation recently, and there are some planned savings with respect to that. How much would those savings be? And well, first let's hear about that first, and then we can, if there's time, we'll move on.
So thank you for that question. Yes, the government stopped producing the penny last May 4th, and on February 4th of this year, we made the transition to essentially stop circulation of pennies and start withdrawing them from circulation. As committee members may know, it was costing the government 1.6 cents to produce every penny, so there was a net loss there. So as a result of not producing the penny, we'll be saving $11 million each year. What we're seeing here in the estimates is that there is an upfront cost as people bring back their pennies. They're compensated for the full value of pennies. And what we've seen is that people have been returning their pennies faster than anticipated. So we're seeing a bit of a blip on the front end. That's in part due to the success of many charitable campaigns that have been mounted in response to the penny elimination, and that will tail off over the coming months and years. Pardon me?
Any salvage recovery?
Yes, the pennies when they come back are destroyed and melted, and there's salvage value for that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. La première chose que je vais faire.
Thank you very much. The first thing I'd like to do, following Ms. Nash and Mr. Bryson's question, is to ask you, you referred to assessment documents regarding the effectiveness of the advertising. Could you table these documents before the committee, as well as an assessment of the costs incurred by the advertising to date? And if you have an effectiveness slash cost report, we'd appreciate that for advertising. Yes, of course, we can table that before the committee. Now, I'm not sure if you are the person who would answer the next question, but since 2006, there has been a big rebranding effort regarding the government's trademark. It was quite substantial regarding websites and overall presentation. Do you have an estimate of the costs of this rebranding since 2006, or at least recent costs? Because there's been talk of websites and various materials that have been modified, not for substantive reasons, but purely for appearance reasons. Well, I can only speak about what the Department of Finance is responsible for. I can't speak across the board for all departments, but in terms of the government's trademark, indeed, as part of its advertising campaigns, the government has developed, along with the Treasury Board and the department, a trademark that focuses on the Economic Action Plan. From a communication standpoint, I would say that there is a rationale behind this to the extent that there is a media environment that means it is important that the government, whether it be in relation to the Economic Action Plan or on other issues, it is important for the government to be able to communicate effectively and strongly. My time is limited, but could you table those documents regarding cost, and also if you have a branding efficiency and effectiveness assessment regarding the Department of Finance and the budget transition from the Economic Action Plan. Next question will be about infrastructure. I don't know if anyone is at the table to respond to this. It is regarding the Parliamentary Budget Office's findings and the investments that were made. So I hope that my time is being stopped just on the clock for a moment while this is being done.
Merci.
Thank you. So I'm sure you are aware of the Parliamentary Budget Office's report on infrastructure investments and the findings therein. And the fact is that since 2007, with all the infrastructure problems, particularly the Building Canada, there was $6 billion that was earmarked under different budgets. It was never actually spent, and this money has now expired. It's lapsed. Can you confirm the finding of the Parliamentary Budget Officer in this regard?
Yeah, a better question to pose to Infrastructure Canada. What I could say is that is something you normally see with infrastructure programming and infrastructure funding. Very often there's delays in either reaching agreements with provinces to commit funds to specific projects, or if you're dealing with large complex projects, there can be delays in the environmental assessment, kind of the front end design phase, and also in project execution. And I think a good example you can see in Ottawa, where built funds under the 2007 Building Canada plan are being used to pay for the Ottawa Light Rail project. And as you're aware, I think the final agreements for that project with the proponent were signed this year.
I can understand it might be normal to some extent, but we're talking about 35% of all the funds that were allocated in budgets that were actually not spent. 35%. Is that normal, or is that really over and above what we usually see in terms of lapsed funds?
I mean, it's a question you would want to pose, I think, to Infrastructure Canada officials. At the beginning of the previous plan, there was roughly $4 billion that belonged to the previous generation of programming, so the Canada Strategic Infrastructure Fund, Water Infrastructure Fund, and so forth, that had not been spent in those prior periods, that was wound up being spent in the period that followed.
30 seconds. I understand that infrastructure might be more appropriate to answer this question, but investing in infrastructure is a huge component of the Economic Action Plan. So I really want to know how we can hold the government to account regarding the promises it made regarding investment for economic stimulus. Regarding what's actually happening in reality, what we are seeing is $6 billion that was re-announced by the government. It's, in fact, money that was never really used from the previous budget.
When you have a large number of complex projects and the federal government doesn't control the timelines for whether it's particularly the execution of those projects, that it's not surprising that you would see amounts at that scale, and a lot of them may be dependent on a small number of large projects being delayed and so forth. Certainly, I think every dollar that's ever been committed by the federal government through those, or been allocated through those programs, is eventually spent.
Okay. Thank you. Merci. Merci, Monsieur Caron. Mr. Hoback, please.
Actually, use this one here, please. Number 12. Welcome, witnesses. It's great to see you here this morning. I guess where I'm going to ask you is a little bit about some of our international funding that's included in these estimates. You state there's a $10 million increase for the World Bank, which is related to which is to help private investment in agriculture research. I'm just kind of curious if you can give us some details of what that research may be and just basically how the taxpayer can make sure that that money's been used properly.
Thanks for the question. I had this question at Senate last night and don't know if I hit a home run, so I'll try to explain it a little bit better. Okay. This is a payment to the World Bank, so the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And essentially what we're calling it is a pull mechanism where we're working with other governments, the UK and Australian governments specifically, to essentially create a prize structure to incent the private sector to play a part in addressing some of the agricultural productivity challenges in the developing world. And I got a good example for you. It's right now we're working again with these partners to structure a prize to incent private sector players to come up with a new seed variety, drought-resistant seed variety for East Africa. So where a normal push mechanism would put money into research and development and then hope that these researchers and developers would come up with a solution, this is essentially going a priori, a prize structure, and then crowding in private sector investment to come up with the solution to essentially unlock or unleash the prize if in the event that they come up with such solution. So in the example, if they do come up with a seed variety that works and it has a demonstration effect, then the prize would effectively unleash itself.
So how do you go about deciding who wins the prize? Is it a set of criteria laid out through the...
Right, we're working with experts like the Food and Agriculture Association, essentially global experts in this space to construct the prize, to go through a design phase. And right now we're just at that kind of indicative period. And then that will be essentially put out for tender globally and with set criteria and benchmarks and certain adoption benchmarks to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of the prize or of the product.
Is it too early to see what the uptake is from the private sector in looking at this type of program?
Generally right now we're in a fundraising period where we're trying to compel other donors to participate, and right now we're working with the government of the UK and Australian government and the World Bank and other UN institutions to essentially go through a fundraising period. So it's a little too early. We're still in a pilot phase and constructing these different program proposals.
So if I understand this right, then you'll lay out the criteria of what you want to see for a result.
Exactly.
And then you'll lay that criteria out there and say if X, Y, Z can go about doing the research to get that criteria or meet that criteria, whoever gets there first, there's a monetary reward for doing that. Is that the way to sum it up?
Exactly. Like a tangible example, again, with this seed variety technology is we're looking for so many of hectares of planted seed varieties in East Africa, so a Sudan, a Somalia type geography, that would actually demonstrate effectiveness, and then we would pay out the prize based on some independent assessment that this actually worked.
Absolutely brilliant. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's innovative financing in the official development space. So again, contradictory to the general pull mechanism, this is actually trying to crowd in private sector financing to leverage their innovation and expertise.
That's excellent. That's really good. The main estimates is a reference to statutory payments to the IDB for reconstruction and development. I'm just kind of curious what that includes and what's that going to be used for.
Thanks again for the question. So generally, the Minister of Finance is the governor of the World Bank, and by virtue of that, we're going through a general capital increase of that institution. So all 180 contributing members to the World Bank are now asked to contribute share capital to grow the size of the bank. The current portfolio of lending of the bank is about $200 billion, and that'll be growing to near $300 billion over the next 5 years.
So that growth is based on requirements for just having a bigger capital pool to distribute, or inflation, or?
Exactly. I mean, this is the World Bank acts as a banking institution. We contribute share capital. They're able to leverage that share capital with the AAA standing in capital markets, raise more money, and on-lend to developing world countries at favorable rates. So Canada is the 8th largest donor in the World Bank, so we're doing our share to contribute this capital base.
Any example programs that they would do, just to give us an example?
Well, World Bank programming is very diverse.
So I guess maybe we'll leave that there.
Well, in a continent like Africa, I mean, sometimes it can compose up to 90% of a sovereign's budget. So, and that's across infrastructure, healthcare, education. I mean, the World Bank programming is exceptionally diverse and important.
Okay, I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Holbach. We'll go to Monsieur Côté, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses who made themselves available in order to respond to our questions. What's deplorable, however, is that it's been almost a year that the Minister of Finance hasn't come and been held to account before this committee. The last time was in 2012 regarding Bill C-48, and this is deplorable. This is an omnibus bill. We're dealing with a new omnibus bill that is not as large as the previous one, but in fact is a continuation of the unfortunate pathway the government is going down. I would have preferred to have had the Minister of Finance or the Minister of State for Finance appear. Those are the people who are accountable to the public. They're the ones that need to be held to account. You are, of course, government employees, and so you're not in the same position. I'd like to know what sort of latitude you have to discuss the main estimates figures. How far can you actually go in discussing these figures?
We would do our best to respond at the table to inquiries that we're receiving from members on the estimates.
I think we should try to put specific questions and let the officials answer.
Oui, tout à fait. Je vais aborder ça d'ailleurs, Monsieur.
Yes, indeed. I'll tackle things that way, Mr. Chair. Indeed, I will. Now, as far as the Department of Finance's spending under the 2013-2014 main estimates, the Department of Finance is calling for $5 million in grants and contributions. This is a drop in relation to the 2012-2013 main estimates to the tune of $210 million. This is due to the stopping of payments for relief debt, for the debt relief rather. Now, in relation to the 2012-2013 main estimates, which countries benefited from the debt relief payments made by Canada? So this is in comparison to 2013-2014, please.
Just to position these payments in context, the Government of Canada provides debt relief to heavily indebted and poor countries in the context of our engagement in the Paris Club. So, we negotiate this debt relief agreement, but our exposures are held by EDC, Canada Wheat Board, and a Canadian International Development Agency. So while the Department of Finance is negotiating the debt relief, we then come home and compensate these organizations because we've just written off their exposure. However, we're now essentially canceling these payments because the reality is that EDC, the Wheat Board, or CETA long ago has already written down these payments because there was a default or non-performing situation. So the write-down was 10 years ago, so it's essentially just the federal government paying itself to do business, and we thought this was effectively inefficient. Last year, more directly to your question, we provided debt relief to the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Ivory Coast.
Il me reste 1 minute.
I have 1 minute left. Tell me, is this Government of Canada initiative comparable to other countries that are members of the Paris Club, or are we acting in an isolated fashion?
The Paris Club, which is effectively, G20 representation, has a comparability of treatment for all countries. So the Paris Club goes in unison to provide debt relief in the same terms to all countries, and that's effectively at 90%. The Government of Canada chooses to top it up by the additional 10% under the Canadian Debt Relief Initiative. So we're effectively writing off 100% of debts to these heavily indebted and poor countries.
OK. Ça va bien. Oui, je vais revenir là-dessus plus tard.
Good, I'll come back to that later.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for being here this morning. And you've provided us with some excellent testimony. And we want to just thank you for the work that you do. And oftentimes we don't do that. We fail to realize just how much work is being done behind the scenes. And it's very, very apparent this morning. I know that Mr. Bryson wanted to ask this question. He ran out of time, so I'll do that for him. There's a change in the Nova Scotia. And I have 3 questions. So maybe what I'll do is I'll ask the 3 questions, and then because we're gonna have to get Mr. Catt up. I got just a quick question for him as well too. There was a change in the Nova Scotia additional equalization payments in the main estimates. And can you explain how this relates to the new formula for equalization introduced in 2007? That's question number 1. The second question, maybe we can just wrap up this important issue about government advertising. And Mr. Catt, you've provided us with some excellent information here. The importance, first of all, I think you've demonstrated that well. But there's always the I think it's an honest question that has to be asked. Are we going overboard? And so I guess my question is, does this government spend more or less than previous governments in percentage of spending? Because I also understand, of course, the budget changes the budget number. So that's the second question. And then the third question, and I don't know who I can direct this to, but this is in relation to the new bridge. And of course, the new bridge is so important to my riding, but to the rest of Canada too. I think it's 30% of trade goes across the Michigan border there, and anybody that's traveled there knows that the old bridge is in a total case of disrepair, and there's so much congestion. So there's been some tremendous movement there, but I see that there's $25 million being spent or being allocated to the bridge construction too. Maybe somebody could just fill us in as to what those dollars are being used for. So those 3 questions, if you could answer those for me, please.
Okay, well, I can thank you for the questions. I can answer the first one, I think, for you, which is with respect to the additional fiscal equalization offset payment to Nova Scotia and the changes in that. Basically, these offset payments are based on the 2005 offshore agreements with Nova Scotia, and what they do is they compare the equalization that the province would receive with their offshore resources included in the formula with the equalization they would receive without those included in the formula, and it essentially pays the difference between those. So it essentially protects their offshore revenues from counting against the equalization formula. And changes in those are really a function of changes in Nova Scotia's offshore revenues. So as those revenues change, it'll have an impact on that amount.
A real good news story for Nova Scotia. Okay, then the second question about the advertising, and if you don't mind, Mr. Catt, if you could just answer that for us.
On the total government advertising, I would suggest that you direct your question to the Privy Council office, because I cannot speak on the kind of the total picture, and I'm sure my colleagues at the Privy Council could do so. In terms of finance, it is true that in terms of advertising, there's been an increase over the past, particularly since 2008 with the economic crisis and the government's response, which is the Economic Action Plan. We were clearly in a crisis, economic crisis mode, and the government had to respond. And one of the tools, again, was through Economic Action Plan advertising, which a part of it was provided to the Department of Finance as the kind of the overarching or the chapeau, if I can say so, of sort of the Economic Action Plan writ large.
Thank you. You got 1 minute, sir, for the bridge story.
Sure. I can just give a brief answer. Transport Canada can provide more details in terms of the activities associated with that investment. As some of you may be aware, they have a dedicated team who's been working for a number of years to advance the Windsor-Detroit International Crossing. This funding is primarily to maintain the activities of that team as the project moves further into the procurement process. There's still a lot of planning and logistical work to do, and also legal work and so forth. So, as I think people are aware, it's a multi-jurisdictional, large, complex project. This funding is to advance that. It is not to support directly it's not to finance the construction per se. That would be another sort of step in the process in the future.
Keep the ball rolling.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
And there has, I think, as some people are aware, there has been recent good news. There's a presidential permit that's been issued to advance the project in the U.S., and that's been welcome news.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Rankin, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses from the department for being here. Like Mr. Van Kesteren, I want to thank you for the work you do for Canadians. I'd like to take you to the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report that was released this year entitled 2013 Economic and Fiscal Outlook Report. And it provides that office's current and medium-term outlook for the Canadian government's finances. It includes updated estimates of the structural budget balance and presents estimates of the economic impacts of measures and revisions to spending levels in the 2013 budget, as well as comparisons to Finance Canada's projections. Now, it seems that in that report, the PBO has pointed to what it considers the real impact of Budget 2013, eliminating thousands of jobs, cutting direct program spending, and weakening GDP growth. So I'd like to talk about each of those, if I could. First of all, the 2013 Economic and Fiscal Outlook Report references $9.1 billion in cuts to direct program spending in the current budget. Is that assessment accurate in your judgment?
With respect to the $9.1 billion, that is that's a total over 5 years. The revision to direct program spending between the updated economic projections in the fall in November 2012 and the budget. There was a number of factors that led to that. Wouldn't necessarily consider them cuts, more as forecast revisions for a number of areas, whether that be expected costs for essential services due to lower inflation, revisions to payments to provinces for resource royalties. They just flow through the government budgetary balance. There's no effect on the budgetary balance, so just a revenue and then it's an offsetting expenditure. At the same time, there's also a similar thing for a Crown Corporation. Some of their revenues are on the revenue side, but they also are reported as an expense. So it's several flow-through items there.
Thank you. It also said, I think, that 14,000 jobs would be eliminated as a result of the 2013 budget, and when taken together with the last budget and fiscal update, that would look like the total number of jobs eliminated by the Conservatives is 67,000. Is that consistent with your measures?
Well, on that, I'm not necessarily the expert on the job estimate itself. That would be some of my colleagues. But what I would say is that I understand from the report that what the PBO did was they took half of that $9.1 billion that you're referring to. That's a judgment call on their part as to whether that should be flowing through. As I explained, a number of those items are not directly there.
A point of order, Ms. Glover. Just stop the time. Point of order, Ms. Glover.
These officials are clearly here to talk about the main estimates, which is what the opposition and this committee have decided we wish to discuss. And so it's obvious these officials are not here to and not prepared to discuss something entirely outside of the main estimates, like job projections, etc. So I would ask the chair to rule on whether or not this is relevant types of questions, given we're here on main estimates.
Yeah, just on that point of order, we are dealing with votes 1, 5, 10, 15, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. So if we could have members stick to those particular votes and particular subject areas, the questions are valid, but they are outside the gamut in terms of these specific areas. So
well,
it's just we did invite the officials here today to address these specific votes.
Well, could I ask, Chair, if FINTRAC's in the 2013-2014 estimates, Financial Transactions and Report Analysis Center, is that legitimate?
Yes.
Fair ball, as far as you're concerned?
Yeah. Could we have the FINTRAC representative?
Is there somebody from FINTRAC who might be able to assist?
Thank you, Mr. Rankin.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I think I understand that FINTRAC is requesting in the estimates a net funding decrease. However, it's requesting a funding increase of $500,000 for an economic increase for personnel expenditures. So if that's correct, what operations are going to be affected by the net decrease in the amount of funding requested?
On the economic impact is mostly on small on personal, small on trips, and professional contract.
Okay. Now, there's a report out last month from the Senate Committee on Banking, Trade and Commerce about combating money laundering, essentially. And in that report, the committee recommends that the elimination of a $10,000 threshold for international electronic fund transfers. If that recommendation were implemented, would FINTRAC require more resources, human resources, or money to address the increased number of reports that would be submitted to FINTRAC?
First of all, the government is welcoming that report. We are currently assessing all the recommendations, so I don't know if finance can answer that question. But until there is an answer on the recommendation, I cannot talk about it.
Okay.
So.
The government is currently assessing the totality of the recommendations. There are a number of interesting recommendations that came out of that report, and part of that assessment is also assessing any potential cost implications of the recommendations, so that will factor into the decision making.
I'll pause then. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rankin. Mr. Jean, please, for your round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming today. I did just want to set the record straight, Mr. Chair. As far as I recall, we actually had Minister Flaherty here on November 7th on BIA2, and Minister Menzie, of course, on March 5th. And I thought I'd heard my colleague mention that we haven't had Minister Flaherty here in, I think, over a year, he said. And I just wanted to make sure we set the record straight on that, because obviously we have had 2 appearances by Ministers of Finance here over the last 6 or 7 months. So, thank you.
Thank
you. My interest is, first of all, if Mr. The marketing man could come back, that would be very helpful. But in the meanwhile, I'd like to talk a little bit about inflation targeting, and I know it's more of a discussion for the Bank of Canada, but I noticed in your intro remarks you talked a little bit about inflation targeting, and I know in 1991, for instance, when inflation was 5%, there was a 2% target introduced. It was met in 1998, and since that time it's been consistent as far as a target. And I was wondering, first of all, the issue of price level targeting versus inflation targeting and the real effects of inflation on economic growth. Is this why do we have a 2% target instead of a 0% target, I guess, is my main question. And will the effect of inflation targeting, what will it have on economic growth generally on a macro basis?
Again, that a bit beyond my area. I think that's a question more for the Bank of Canada.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that. So do you use any of the Keynesian methods, like the new Keynesian-Phillips curve, or any of those, that methodology to deal with your financial projections, or is that more of a Bank of Canada issue? You deal with the numbers and report them in the main estimates and then the supplementary estimates, etc. Do you use any of this modeling, Keynesian-Phillips curve and things like that in your analysis of what's happening?
Well, again, I think that's more for, if you're looking for that, that would be more for the Bank of Canada question.
That would be a no, you don't use it?
Well, I'm from the fiscal side, so whether on the economic side they use any, I know they have models, but I don't know exactly what they use.
Mr. Katia, I know we've had an opportunity to hear from you many times before, and your understanding of marketing is quite impressive. What is top of the mind awareness in marketing? Do you know?
Well, again, from our I'll respond again from a finance perspective. So when we're talking about economic issues or what's on sort of people's minds, more generally, it would be public policy issues, concerns about the economy. We've seen this particularly over the past 2 years, concerns about the economy, concerns about their jobs, concerns about their financial well-being, particularly given the current economic circumstances.
But in marketing, top-of-the-mind awareness is a marketing idea that suggests the first brand that comes to your mind is top-of-the-mind awareness. In essence, when you think of soft drinks, most people think of Coca-Cola. When you think of Mexican restaurants, Taco Bell usually. It depends on the marketing, and that's what top-of-the-mind awareness is. And in this particular case, people don't even recognize, I'm asking this question, but isn't it true that people don't even recognize from time to time that they see advertising? In fact, the marketing experts and research proves that many times people don't see marketing, but in their mind it's there because they hear the jingle, they inadvertently see things as they pass by on highways such as billboards without even recognizing it consciously, but subconsciously it's there, and that's why many mega billions of dollars are spent every year in North America on top-of-the-mind awareness, consistently giving that same jingle, that same ad, and in fact, I would suggest that's why Coca-Cola, for the most part, only advertises Coca-Cola. They don't advertise the other suite of drinks they have because they're trying to distribute that and trying to make sure that people think of Coca-Cola products always. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would agree with your assessment, and if I link it to the Economic Action Plan advertising, and it's the reason why the advertising has been, particularly in terms of the messaging and the nature of it, has been fairly consistent over the past 2 years. To your very point about being consistent about what this plan is about. So that again, from a messaging standpoint, that it is effective.
In fact, it's all about confidence in the economy, confidence in the market, confidence in Canada, and as we see the stock market, it's basically 100% driven by consumer confidence. So it's fair to say that the marketing is working. We've heard from you that marketing was working, and in fact this top-of-the-mind awareness campaign is very successful because it's making Canadians believe positively in the economy. Wouldn't that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jean. I just wanted to, as the chair, follow up on a couple of items. First of all, Ms. Harrison, in your opening statement, you talk about decreases of $4.2 million related to savings identified as part of the Budget 2012 spending review, and $4.4 million for various sunsetting measures. Can you just explain some of those measures for us in terms of the savings identified?
The Budget 12 spending reductions for the department, there are 3 main areas in the department that we're seeking efficiencies. The first is in our internal services, corporate groups. We've done some restructuring, some realignment of responsibilities to drive out some efficiencies. On the policy research side of the department, we've reorganized to embed standalone research analytics into the policy advice function as opposed to having them standalone. And we've also made some greater use of information technology and things like our staffing and recruitment processes. With respect to the 4.4 decrease, this is sunsetting of some previously approved time-limited items, including the corporate asset review, which was the review of government assets, some funding related to the department's role as co-chair of the G20 Framework Working Group, some work on GST technical registered disability savings plan, employee profit sharing plans and such, and some sunsetting resources in the financial sector area related to specific legislative and policy drafting requirements.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a second question about estimates generally. My third is going to be about OSFI, so that's just a hint for the OSFI individual to come to the table for the third question. For the second one, the estimates, as a parliamentarian, you're dealing with estimates, you deal with public accounts. It's an awful lot of information. I frankly find the 3-year comparison very helpful for me. I find the explanations in the estimates this year much better than they were last year, so I mean, I certainly compliment the department on that. Can you just perhaps explain to Canadians watching this, in terms of estimates, we have main estimates and then you have A's and B's and so on. So sometimes that is a little confusing to your average Canadian. So can you explain the challenges for your department, perhaps not on the statutory side, but in terms of trying to forecast what the department will spend in the upcoming year?
I think the challenge is the various financial exercises throughout the calendar fiscal year and the timing and such. The production of the main estimates, which you have before you. You can see by the size of that document that we have to put it to bed, so to speak, in from an input perspective, late January, which is well before the federal budget's been tabled. So, as a matter of course, the main estimates do not reflect any new funding initiatives that will be announced subsequent to this document being finalized. So, our opportunity to get those funding initiatives in front of committees in Parliament is through the supplementary estimates processes. And so there are 3 opportunities to do that. Supplementary estimates A is typically we try and get that out as soon as possible after the budget for any very high profile items that we can get through the approval process. And for officials, just because it's been announced in the budget doesn't mean it's automatic. There is a challenge and review process that we go through with Treasury Board ministers. Supplementary estimates B is traditionally where you see for Finance Canada, should we get any voted resources, you'll see those appearing in our supplementary estimates B, normally around October, November, because that's given us time to do the due diligence and process through Treasury Board. And then the final supplementary estimates just before the year close is traditionally for us just updating our statutory forecast. And should there be any need to realign resources between votes, that's our last opportunity to come before committee and Parliament to seek those approvals. So I understand that it's a snapshot of a bit of a moving picture. There's mains and then the 3 estimates.
I appreciate that, and I think people following these hearings would find that very helpful. Just a brief final question with respect to OSFI. It's a very well regarded institution both domestically and internationally. With respect to the increased responsibilities for OSFI, if you look at increased oversight with respect to CMHC, can you address sort of any issues with respect to budgeting within OSFI in terms of these increased responsibilities?
Yes, sure. So the increased responsibilities were given to OSFI as part of the budget last year. So we did increase our staffing to provide these services to CMHC. But I have to say that these services are cost recovered based. So they're done through a cost recovery model with CMHC. So they are not affected by the appropriation funding that we get through the vote.
Okay. Okay, I thank you for that clarification. I want to thank our officials for being here. There was a request for a document, Mr. Caron. You wanted to request a document?
Évidemment, on termine maintenant la période de questions. So we're concluding the question period. I would like additional information from the department, if you could table it before the committee. As far as the transition office to a national system of securities is concerned, the Supreme Court handed down the decision in 2011. We knew that there was $27 million spent up until then for the transition office for a national organisation. We'd like to know how much was spent on the transition office that the government will keep open following the 2013 budget. So from December 2011, how much was invested or spent on the transition office for a national securities regulatory office? And if you could make it as detailed as possible, that would be much appreciated.
Time can submit questions to the chair, and I will happily provide that to department officials to respond. Is that clear in terms of the request that was made? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank all of our officials for being here. Colleagues, I just did want to ask, did you want to deal with the votes with respect to these estimates today, or did you want to deal with all the votes after we deal with CRA officials? You want to deal with the finance votes all together? Okay, we will deal with all the votes all together after CRA. Okay. I'll thank all officials for being here. If I could ask the members of the subcommittee, we're going to adjourn this meeting, and if I could ask them to stay, because I do need some advice with respect to the calendar. Other members are welcome to stay if they like, but I do need some help as the chair with respect to the calendar. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.